We're going to be looking at a brand new flagship from Kinera today, the Kinera Loki. And at $3,100, the Loki is nearly twice the price as Kinera's previous flagship, the Balder. So it's safe to say that this is uncharted market territory for Kinera, and I'm sure you're curious to see if it can actually pull its weight. As usual, I'll be going over its fit, physical and technical design, and most importantly, what it sounds like. But first, let's see what comes in the box. You get your Kinera Loki IEMs pretty beautifully displayed with a One Effect Audio UP OCC cable with a 4.4 termination, a hard, protective, genuine leather carrying case, an extra cable with nylon insulation and a 4.4 termination, 3 sets of SpinFit CP145 ear tips, Symbio F foam tips, ASLA crystal ear tips, Final Audio Type E ear tips, 5 sets, a cleaning brush, a user manual, a thank you card, and of course, this is Kinera, the design background intro card. So the Loki's packaging is pretty hard to ignore. It's a little more subtly mythical than what Kinera is usually going for, with the usual Kinera mythological lore tucked away on a small card rather than in a pamphlet demanding to be read. So those perhaps cheesy but endearing components are less in your face, and it lets the other really beautiful features like the color schemes at play and also the cables that come with it stand out and speak for themselves. And seriously, look at these. The gloss, the sparkle, the marbly blue and red faceplate, these are as cool as they are pretty, and really, I'll leave it at that. Now, moving on to fit, let's address the literal elephant in the room, and that's the chunky 6mm nozzle on the Loki. This didn't bother me personally, as my primary pair of IEMs are the Audio Oracle MK2, which has an identical nozzle width. But I gotta say, buyer beware on this. This might be a deal breaker for some, or others like myself might not care too much or have already gotten used to a nozzle like this. But that said, if you're okay with the nozzle size, you'll probably be okay with the rest of this. Sure, it's big, fat, and chunky like nearly all IEMs in this price range, with a million drivers stuffed inside of them, but I'd simply describe the fit as inoffensive and perfectly fine. All the edges are comfortably rounded, nothing pokes or strains the outer ear, insertion depth is about average, and that's about it. I was able to listen to the Loki for hours without any trace of fatigue, so all good in the fit and comfort department. I also want to just take a minute to go over this god tier ear tip selection. I mean, you got SpinFits for the soft silicone, ASLA crystals for the hard silicone, Final Audio Type E for the thick silicone, and my personal favorite, Symbio Type F for the foam tips. I've been wearing the Type F foams for quite a while now after a bunch of personal tip experimentation, but this is the first time that I've seen them included with any IEM, and they're really unique foams that are fluffier, puffier, kind of firmer than the more common Comply foam tips, for example. Anyway, just saying, these were a nice serendipitous surprise. Also, 2 premium cables, pretty nice. Now to go over a pretty promising and impressive technical design. You have a 1 6mm liquid diaphragm dynamic driver for subs and bass, 4 Knowles balanced armatures for the mid-range, 2 Knowles treble balanced armatures, 4 Sonian electrostatics for the remaining high frequencies, and, to my delight, a bone conductor driver working on the low end with the dynamic driver. And I'll take any opportunity I can to go over bone conduction, as I think it's one of the coolest things to see incorporated in an IEM. In short, bone conduction bypasses the eardrum, unlike regular air conduction, and vibrates the ossicles, that is, bones in your inner ear. By sending waves across a solid medium rather than through the air, our hearing range actually expands, in theory allowing us to hear frequencies lower than 20 Hz. But more importantly, bone conductor drivers have the potential to utterly melt your brain and jaw with bassy vibrations, but we'll come back to that shortly. Now, let's have just an objective sound analysis based on the Loki's frequency response graph, which was kindly published by Kinera. So we see here that the Loki's most amplified frequencies are in its sub-bass, that is 20 to 80 Hz. It takes its time cooling those levels down, starting around 50 Hz, leaving mid-bass, that's around 80 to 160 Hz, fairly amplified. If you don't know what any of this means, subs are responsible for rumble, while mid-bass is usually responsible for the slamming, impactful, or I guess general body of the low end. To further simplify this, mid-bass is the deepness you hear, while sub-bass is more like the deepness you feel. But moving on, we see a weird little bump in high bass that's maybe negligible, but it mostly seems level with the mid-range. High bass, for those who don't know, is the area that produces what we can descriptively call warmth. Amplify it too much, you get a muddy tone. Cut it down too much, you get a cold and kind of clinical tone. But in the case of the Loki, high bass doesn't seem like it's going to affect the overall coloration very much. It's less amplified than the subs and mid bass, and like I said, about evenly amplified with the mid range, which leads me to say that we can expect a pretty articulate separation between the bass and the center frequencies. Then for the lower and center mids, we see a light U-shape. And overall, mid-range seems to be one of the least amplified parts of the Loki's balance. From this, we can likely expect the meatier fundamental parts of vocals, which are rich and mid-range frequencies, to sit a little more quietly in the mix. But check out the high mids and the treble. We're seeing a pretty big boost around 1 kHz to 3.5 kHz, and a mid-treble boost from 5 kHz to 8 kHz, with a notable cut around 7.5 kHz, which will likely make sibilance, that's s and ts sounds, less pronounced and painful and in your face. But to my eyes, and also to my ears, but I'll get to that in a second, the most notable part of this treble profile is the high treble. Ignore frequencies over 20 kHz in this example, we can't hear them anyway. There, that's better. So frequently IEMs and over-ears start rolling off the really high frequencies around 10 kHz, but it looks like the Loki is kind of like rolling them up, giving them a prominence that you don't usually see in most tunings. It's in this range that airy, wispy textures usually live. Think vocal rasp, transients, cymbals, reverbs. We can definitely expect to hear quite a bit of that from the Loki based on what we're seeing here in the upper treble. But to sum up overall what we can expect from it based on the tuning published by Kinera, a rumbling, punchy low end, a slightly recessed mid-range with good separation from the low end, and a driving and most notably airy and sizzling treble profile. In short, the Loki seems to be as trebly as it is bassy. But enough with a frequency response graph. Let's talk about some of my listens. So I can confirm that the Loki is pretty bold in highs and lows alike, though I wouldn't quite call it V-shaped. I have a friend who tried it who said it sounded like the Empire Ears Odin because of the insane bass on it, and when I tried it, I thought it sounded like Letschure's Cadenza a little bit because of the kind of like hot and spicy treble profile that we have going here, and I think we're both right. But I have to say, I'm a really big fan of the tuning that I was hearing in the Loki. It has a forceful, powerful low end that made kick drums, bass lines, electronic music as a whole really satisfying, articulate, and exciting. But it also has a sizzling, airy, lifting treble profile that brings a colored brightness to parts like vocals and acoustic guitars. There's a distinct speed and snappy quality to the highs that we likely have the electrostatic drivers to thank for. But I know what you're thinking. What about the bone conductor in the low end? At least that's what I was thinking when I was first putting the Loki in my ears. Honestly, it's a more subtle effect. It's there, but it doesn't produce as prominent of a sensation as IEMs like the Odyssey or Legend Evo or Kublai Khan, other IEMs with bone conductor drivers. Nonetheless, I was really into this low end. What I like even more than the power and punch and rumble that it had to offer, it had an extreme attention to detail. Listening to the sub-bass drenched album Halo by Juana Molina was like hearing it for the first time, with the Loki showcasing complex layers and separation, not just within its bass, but within its sub-bass specifically. The bass detail paired with the highly exposing treble profile makes the Loki one of the most detail-laden IEMs I've gotten to listen with. This goes beyond balance. A lot of it has to do with the Loki's almost surgical level of imaging. The quietest details find a way of peeking out from the folds of noisy tracks, while tracks with more simplistic arrangements become all the more intimate. While the Loki does push a pretty serious width into its stage, this isn't one of the largest sound stages that I've heard from an IEM. Rather, it holds its most impressive appeal in its firmly defined placements of parts and highly detail-oriented layering. So with that, yeah, the Loki's getting the MajorHiFi Gold. Though I spent several hours listening with it, I knew after 30 minutes that the Loki is Kinera's ace in the hole, and definitely the most impressive IEM I've heard from the company to date. 64 Audio, Empire Ears, other well-known high-end IEM manufacturers have basically been put on notice here. Kinera is entering the ring and they're not playing around. You can get 10% off an order from Audio 46 and also help me pay my rent by using code CHRIS10 at checkout. Code is applicable to a wide variety of brands and items, though not all brands and items. However, if you're having issues applying the code, shoot an email to support@audio46.com and they'll be able to help you. I'm including a link down below to order the Kinera Loki from Audio 46, as well as a link to Kinera's entire catalog from Audio 46. If you make a purchase using those links, you'll help support the channel and in turn allow me to buy the fancy feast for my cat. And I'll be eternally grateful. Anyway, this is Chris with MajorHiFi, and I'll see you guys next time.